All right, so with that being said, we are going to start off with handling hoarding, effective strategies for removing cats from bad circumstances. We have Liz Finch and Stella Ickes here to present. Liz is, during her 12-year career as a professional writer, Liz dabbled in animal welfare by volunteering for several small nonprofits and Los Angeles Animal Services. In 2000, she founded a cat rescue organization and began devoting herself more seriously to animal welfare. By 2005, she made the decision to give up her writing career and move to Kanab, Utah to work for Best Friends Animal Society. She started her career at Best Friends answering questions from the public on all aspects of animal care and welfare, transitioned into the manager role of that department, served as senior manager over national programs, and was the director of the community cat programs before landing in her new role. As senior writer for the network, she has merged her two careers once again, got value out of that English degree. Yay, Liz. After living in Canada for 10 years, she relocated to Phoenix, Arizona in 2015, where she lives with a clouder of misfit cats who frequently interrupt her workday, which did already happen once today, by taking over the desk or wreaking havoc in some other part of the house. All right, about Stella Ickes. Stella turned her lifelong passion for animals into a career in 1996 at Farmingville Animal Hospital in New York, where she worked as a veterinary assistant and kennel manager for 10 years. After moving to Florida in 2012, she realized she missed the industry and started volunteering in the veterinary department of Pasco County Animal Services. She was soon offered a position as an animal care technician, which gave her firsthand experience with the plight of homeless animals in the community. By 2016, Stella's passion for helping both pets and people caught the attention of the organization's field services supervisor, who encouraged her to train as an animal control officer. She's now a certified animal control officer in addition to being certified in humane euthanasia. She has served as community engagement officer and on PCAS's Community Engagement Committee, which processes requests for the Pet Safety Net program. In 2021, Stella was named Animal Control Officer of the Year by the California Animal Control Association, and she was the lead officer in charge of a recent grant to Trap-Neuter-Return 600 cats in a high-volume community, driving the effort to completion within 2 months. 2 months, wow. That has identified many hoarding cases and worked. She has identified many hoarding cases and worked with overwhelmed caregivers to find sterilization and placement opportunities, as well as any counseling or other resources needed. In addition, she assists with presentations to local neighborhood associations and civic organizations. Stella has 6 pets of her own, 4 feisty dachshunds, her favorite breed, a gentle, lovable Rottweiler, and a beautiful 3-legged calico cat. Excellent. So welcome Liz and Stella, and I believe Liz will be starting out.
Thanks for the intro, and I just want to apologize in advance. I had throat surgery about a week ago, which is just as much fun as it sounds. So if my voice starts to fade in and out or anything, that is why, and I will try and make up for that as much as I can. But so just to give you a little background from myself and then Stella on our answers to those questions, I think. Well, I have been involved with animal welfare for officially, professionally, 17 and a half years, but I started about 25 years ago with a nonprofit rescue and then joined Best Friends Animal Society in 2005. And I have been involved with many cat hoarding cases from the jump. The group that I started volunteering with was run by a hoarder, so we started off right away being involved with that, and then I have worked with cases with Best Friends on numerous occasions, up to, so definitely a number of cases at all those ranges and numbers of cats, up to, and I'll talk a little bit about this one briefly at the end of the presentation, I believe, the Nye County situation that we dealt with in 2007, which is Pahrump, Nevada, and that was about 725 cats that were outside in the desert, and then another 150 that were in the founder's home. So yeah, lots and lots of cats. Stella, you want to answer yours?
Okay, perfect. First of all, I want to say thank you for everyone that's here today, and thank you, Liz and Stacy. I love the diversity from the poll that was given, so that really gives a lot of eye-opening to what the experience is. For me, when it comes to the cat hoarding environment, my position has put me on the front line of being able to identify, recognize these situations. For the past 7 years, it's just been something that I've been drawn to. I've been drawn to the cat community, trying to help, because in our county, there is no leash law. So cats are considered basically a part of a wildlife. So you have the community of the, say, possibly retired folks or so, and it starts with one cat, and they start feeding, and then the next thing you know, it turns into a bigger situation than expected. So we do, as an agency, identify many cat hoarding situations all year long, and we've become innovative on how we handle them and how to approach them for what's best for the caretaker or pet owner and or the animals involved.
So what is animal hoarding? I think it's one of those things that some of us will say, you know it when you see it. This is questionable, right? Is it just an overwhelmed colony, or is this a hoarding situation? So we want to start off with the kind of official definition of what animal hoarding is. And for those of us who've been around for a long time, you probably remember the days when it was referred to as collecting. Someone was a collector, and that has evolved over time. And I'm going to put some text up here, and I'm not going to read through a lot of it, just because obviously I know that all of you can read, and so I will let you do that yourselves, save my voice. But this is kind of the latest definition, and that comes from 2013, which was the 5th edition of the DSM, which is the most recent one. And it evolved from that kind of concept of just collecting to becoming much more of an official recognition that this is a situation that has some mental health components to it. And it started off, I believe, being just sort of lumped in as part of kind of an OCD, well, cat, OCD type behavior, to one where it actually has its own definition, defining animal hoarding specifically as kind of different from hoarding as a broad overall mental health issue or mental disorder. So some of the other stuff on that, though, is this is from Dr. Gary Petronic, which if you don't know him, he is a fantastic veterinarian and researcher who founded back in 1996 an organization called the Hoarding of Animals Research Consortium, or HARC, as part of Tufts University. And he's been really, really involved in quite a lot of research into this topic, and is a big fan favorite of mine. I got the pleasure to meet him and geeked out over talking about hoarding for several hours with him. But HARC was basically a group of researchers that collaborated to better define and understand the problem of animal hoarding. And so these findings cited here came from 54 case reports that came from 10 animal control agencies and humane societies across the country. And not a surprise, I think some of these that you'll maybe say, yeah, most women, older women. I mean, some of this I think is a little bit skewed because animal welfare in general, as we probably all know, is heavily skewed female, probably older, although I'm not sure if I can say that, but definitely female. And so these are the types of things that they saw in those. And I think it's a pretty good snapshot of what you see with hoarding situations, and that the prevalence here estimates that it was 700 to 2,000 US cases annually. So even though it was only 54 cases they looked at, I think it's pretty applicable to kind of the big picture. And then Randall Lockwood, who is the Senior Vice President of Anti-Cruelty Initiatives with the ASPCA, he's done quite a bit of work in terms of animal hoarding as well. And I think it's important here to define, and this is an audience that probably understands this well, that animal hoarding is really not about animal sheltering, rescue, or sanctuary. And it shouldn't be confused with just having legitimate efforts to help animals, or even legitimate efforts to help animals where there are hundreds and hundreds of them. It is not an issue really of numbers at all. It's really what is a crucial piece that needs to be there is that the person who is at the center of it is satisfying their need to kind of accumulate animals and control them. If you take a look at deep down what's going on there. And that does mean that some rescues start off legitimately taking in strays and taking in shelter cats, and then the psychology of hoarding, elements that might be there, they sort of find themselves unable to recognize their limitations and let go of the animals in their care. And so Dr. Lockwood did say the hoarders really believe that only they know what's best for these animals, and there's no other recipient of these animals that can provide the quality of care that they think they're providing. And so his estimates is that there are 2,500 to 3,500 cases annually that authorities respond to, which we know is just probably a fraction of what is really out there. And his belief is that kind of rescue hoarders make up virtually all cases with more than 50 animals. So kind of that line, sliding over that line from being a decent sized sort of rescue into hoarding, he saw quite a bit and sees quite a bit in his research and work. If this was, well, I could say points to the person who recognizes maybe the person who is in this photo. For those of you who are from the Southern California area, you might know her. She's a rather notorious hoarder named Kimmy Peck. And this photo came from a slideshow story that was done on her in the Tehachapi News years and years ago. And I just find it pretty hilarious. And that is a wooden gun. It's not a real gun. And Kimmy has been slipped over the line from hoarding, from rescuing to hoarding for decades and decades now. And she's a very classic example of the rescue person who becomes a hoarder, in that she does have a lot of good instincts there, what she's trying to do, but she can't see that she, obviously that level of care going on there in her bedroom is not adequate or appropriate. I don't know how many dogs you can count on the bed, but there's definitely more than 3. However, when you speak to her, and I have spoken to her on the phone, she comes across as a completely sane person. She has quite a lot of supporters because they believe in what she does. She takes in kind of the tough dogs that are highly unadoptable, and then, you know, she has justification for keeping those dogs because of how difficult they are. And so she really is a good example of kind of what happens in the public's mind too, where they start to see people who are hoarders as rescuers and blur that line, which we clearly want to make a point of helping people understand that those two are not the same at all. Other possible elements that you could find in hoarding cases, and this is regardless of the number of animals involved, and this, I think, shows the need for collaboration, and it could be anything from, you know, child or elder abuse if there are other people in the household, to like other additional mental health issues that may be going on. I would say there is always a history of past hoarding, often other hoarded objects. But one thing I would say too is that there is something that these are the things that you kind of need to be prepared for when you go into a hoarding situation, that you want to help, but you should be aware that kind of these are the things you're going to encounter. And I want to put down those kind of last 2, point those out, the denial of conditions, which seems really flabbergasting if there are actually dead animals on the property, that people can not see that as a problem. Or if there's a cat whose condition is like this one in the picture here, you know, there'll be lots of excuses about how they are treating it or whatever, but there, you know, there's a lack of kind of acceptance, or the lack of being able to admit what's going on there. And then there's the cycle of trust and distrust. And I think this is really critical as we move forward into kind of the next part of the presentations, because this is something that you're going to get into, because if you got in the door in the first place, if somebody reached out to you, they want to trust you. They're in trouble. They know they're in trouble and they need help, and they trust that you have some expertise, and so they'll ask for it. But it is not uncommon at all for that to change daily. We had a situation that I worked on in Utah when I lived in Kanab, which is where the sanctuary is, and very small town. And animal control there likes to pretend that cats don't exist, which is fine by us because then we just handle most cat cases. But occasionally they do get pulled into something and they need to ask for us to help with cat situations. And so there was a case with a woman who lived in a mobile home, and she had been called in by her neighbors because she had 20 to 30 cats, I would say, and they were indoor outdoor. And so people were aware of them. There were some issues with dogs in the yard as well. And so when animal control went in, they found that there were that number of cats, and there is a pet limit law in the city, which I just briefly want to say, pet limit laws do not work. The idea for them was to limit situations and kind of be a tool for prosecuting animal hoarding cases. I think as a tool, they maybe are useful. Maybe Stella can speak to that. But as far as like getting people to not hoard, it's a useless kind of ordinance to have in place. But because of that, he was able to say, hey, you're violating this, and so we need to take cats out. And so when we walked in, the woman was really a classic hoarder. She had a lot of those other elements that I mentioned in the previous slide, where she had, when we walked in, there were towers of newspapers and magazines creating pathways through the house, which is pretty classic kind of hoarder pictures in your head. She had these big glass cases where she had lots of tchotchkes and knickknacks that she was showing off, but they were clearly way more in those armoires and so forth than they could handle. So it was just sort of overwhelming. And then she had, when you first walked in, on the right-hand side of her wall was a probably 4 foot by 8 foot framed photo of her son in his full military uniform, and he had been killed in Afghanistan. And she had some tendencies already there, but that was the triggering event. And it was just such a stark reminder to me of the fact that quite often in these cases, there's not just sort of an underlying issue, there can be a trigger that causes people to start escalating in their behavior. And that was it. And if you know that, and if you can identify that, that can be helpful, because you can recognize that in many ways, you know, these cats were surrogates for her son. She was not able to be present to protect her son, to save her son's life, but she was going to do that for these cats. And so they had huge meaning for her. And so to be in there to remove those cats is a really, really tough situation. And I'll be fair, the cats were in, unlike a lot of these cases, they were in fantastic condition. They did not have upper respiratory. They were shy, but some of them were coming out. They were eating in front of us, so they clearly didn't really care. I think going in and out helped alleviate some of the cleaning issues, some of the stress issues, and so forth. And we ended up having to take most of those cats, if not all of them. And honestly, when they went to Best Friends, our catteries at that time, the number of cats per square foot or whatever we had the calculations was higher than the number of cats per square foot in her home. And so we were removing these cats from her home into a far more crowded situation. And so even the quote unquote solution had nothing to do with being a solution. It was simply ticking a box that this animal control officer needed to do. It wasn't helpful for the woman, it wasn't helpful for the cats, and it was quite a frustrating situation to have to be involved with, because you could see all those elements there. And Kanab being the small town that it is, there's very few social service resources or mental health resources, which clearly were what this woman needed. And unfortunately, I don't know what happened in that situation later on. I can venture guess that she just continued taking in new cats. And so at the end, it wasn't really helpful. And because we didn't have full control of that situation because of what animal control wanted us to do, it wasn't an example, I would say, of how you want to handle those situations. And the number one thing I think you can see here from this slide is to, you know, gain their trust, build their trust, and maintain their trust, because you're going to need that, and you're going to need to remain involved at every step in the process. And I think it's more than just going in and cleaning out the house, which is essentially what we were doing, and that's very old school. And this was a number of years ago, I will say. But that is a good segue, I think, to Stella, where she can talk to us now about, coming from the animal control perspective, what's old school and what started off when she began in her career, and kind of where things look today, so that you can kind of see, if you're not involved with animal control and sheltering agencies in your community, why you should be for these cases in particular. So Stella, I'm going to hand it to you.
Perfect. So as a municipal government shelter, our old policies and procedures, and as you see up here on the slide, is our current and was our impound notice. So basically, something would be identified as a potential hoarding case. Say there was a welfare check done by the sheriff's department. They went in, the caretaker or pet owner maybe needed some medical or mental help, and they would be removed for medical care. So at that point, when the animals are left unattended, our agency gets called in. So one way or the other, if we come into this environment, what we would do is go in, remove all the animals that were in that home. Possible citations get issued, and there would be little to no follow-up, if any. So not only would the person, I've seen it over and over again, not only would the person who maybe got taken away from mental care, when they get returned to their home, they're returned to their home with everything gone as far as all their purpose, because what's their purpose is these animals. So at that point, and they're just left with the mess that's left behind. Or you have the other side of things where we would go into people's homes, and it would be the citation method because they are violating an ordinance. We have a policy and procedure. So something's been identified as a hoarding situation. The animals are living in poor, unsanitary conditions. And on top of it, Liz hinted on it earlier regarding the pet limit law. So at that point, in my county, you can have up to 9 domestic animals in your home. So if they were over that limit, they would get, threatened or potential ticketable offenses because they're violating the county ordinance. On top of, do you have shots and tags for your animals? And then the conditions. So now these folks who may have 30 plus cats in their home, an army would come in. And when I say army, it's the sheriff's department, code enforcement, animal control, and they're standing by watching their loved ones, their animals being possibly taken away. And, maybe they have to be caught in a net because they're not going to be friendly with us. So that's heartbreaking in of itself. And then what happens? That pet owner caretaker gets put back into their environment, but completely empty. Because now all their animals are gone. And if there's no follow-up, first of all, I don't agree with that anyways, but if there's no follow-up, then what are they going to do? They're just going to go back out and collect more animals. So that was hard to watch and to witness and to know, like, when we would look into folks as time went on and you look into the history of somebody, they may have had a hoarding situation or mental health issues and or both in other counties and surrounding counties. So then you start to see a pattern, and they're either moving from county to county because they're feeling like they're being watched and monitored. So they're going elsewhere. So what, we needed to do was change our approach because this wasn't working. I think without any kind of post-care and assistance, a hoarder is 100% going to reoffend. So I think that was the drive for me and our agency once that was identified, that we needed to do something different. So right here is one of the first hoarding cases I had worked on, and this was, the pictures don't even tell the story, but they do obviously tell a story. And as you see, there's a handgun. What happened here was a woman, I guess family members hadn't heard from her in a while, and they were concerned, and they called the sheriff's department for a welfare check. They went to the home. I believe nobody came to the door, and they just opened, the front door was unlocked, and they went in and they found the pet owner of approximately, I think it was 28 cats. And she was sitting on that chair with that handgun. And they had to work to get her to, put the gun down and where they could take her for help. So now at that point, this was, like I said, one of my first hoarding cases with the agency back in 2016. So what we did in this case was we went in there. And if you see in the background, there's a white carrier, and there's a black and white cat sitting in it in front of the pantry door. So that's what we did. We went through there, we collected all the animals, and we just kind of went about our business. And this is the case that started me to identifying that what we did here, what happened to this woman, what was the outcome, and I have no clue. If she reoffended, it wasn't our policy to follow up. We didn't offer resources. I think what we thought at that time, which after educating ourselves as an agency, was that the hospital would follow up, the sheriff's office would follow up, somebody else would follow up. And over the years past this case, I've recognized that is not the case. So that was one of the important things that we had identified over time. But with this case, this woman's husband, who was in law enforcement, he had passed away about a year or so prior to this. And basically, she just was soothing her pain with the animals, the hoarding, and other substances, which led her to the point of potential suicide. And Liz mentioned something earlier. There is, in this home, she had a little wing, and it was kind of boarded off, separated, where there was a bedroom and a bathroom that had really nothing in it. It was normal personal items. And then there was the curios that had all the knickknacks in it that were like blocked off from the cats with the china cabinet doors. So there is a theme at times when you run into these hoarding cases that you'll potentially see that. But this was a sad case, but what the positive in it was it started the ball rolling to see how we as an agency could do better. So when it comes to now, as time went on, it was identifying. When these cases were identified, it became, how can we gain somebody's trust? How can we be innovative? We know that the caretaker or pet owner their intentions are to do right by these animals. But what happens is, in the blink of an eye, they become so overwhelmed, but they isolate themselves. People don't generally know it. Or if there is people that are aware of it, it's a very select few, and it's somebody they trust. And so it becomes a burden on the person who may know about it, because they don't want their loved one to suffer. But it's kind of like, if they don't have to see it every day, they don't approach it in any kind of reaching out for help for them. And for me, what I recognized is, because we are a municipal county government shelter, we are the dog catcher, working with my rescue groups that are local to us, because they are a trusted army. People will call a rescue organization before the county shelter, because they feel that a rescue, it's right there in the title, rescue. They're going to rescue me. They're going to rescue my animal. So they're going to rescue me from this situation where you got a dog catcher or animal control. Which one are you going to choose? So when it comes down to these building the collaborations with your rescue organizations, that was a game changer, because they then were the first line of defense that were able to work on the relationship with the potential hoarder or somebody close to them, who then they gain that trust. If we weren't the first people on the scene and they were contacted, then it would become that group that we would work with them together. When it becomes, for me, a one-on-one, when it's identified and I go out to meet with a pet owner, it's always on their terms. I have to build their trust. I have to let them tell me their story. And again, my biggest thing, like I said, is it's on their terms, because if I put them on the defense in any way, then at that point, they're just going to go back and retreat. And I have nothing to force them to open that door to talk to me. So the biggest hurdle is getting that person just to even start talking to you, whether it be, I bring you some food. Do you have any animals that need medical care? I can get you that medical care. However it is to get through to them, and sometimes it takes months, but at the end of all of it, it is the biggest reward, because the outcome for all parties involved is, you know, as happy as can be under the conditions.
Stella, do you want to talk a little bit about the woman that you and I spoke with?
Mission. Yes.
Yes.
The woman. So there is a lady that, from what I found out, the entire story was she worked with a local rescue organization, CAT Alliance organization, that was around for years. And they moved into our county. They kind of were just around our surrounding county. They came into our county and had a brick and mortar place where they were open to the public, and they were doing cats only. And what happened was, eventually they got overwhelmed. We were called in on many occasions. Our humane investigating officer would go out there and, you know, issue some warnings, potential citations. At that point, they wound up having to close shop. And what happened was, what happened was the cats now that were at this this cat alliance needed to go somewhere. So one of the volunteers had taken on 40 plus cats. And she just took them to her house. She didn't know what to do. And she was, you know, obviously cared for these animals. She volunteered with this organization, and they just kind of picked up and left overnight. And so she took these cats in. She wound up falling upon an eviction, and she didn't know what to do with her cats. She wasn't going to abandon them. She loved them. So she moved her 40 cats into her truck. And at that point, the sad part of the story is, I found out, I get a phone call on a Sunday that from a rescue group. They say, we have this woman, this is what's going on. She's living in her vehicle with 40 cats and she needs help. And I didn't realize, so I call her right away. Within 15 minutes, I'm on the phone with this woman. So I find out the day before, on a Saturday, she showed up at my government shelter with the 40 cats in her truck and said, I have 40 cats. They're living in my truck. Can you all help me? She was turned away. And when I heard that, and it's not their fault. It just, the policy would be, we don't take in own cats. That is the policy. So if you want to go by those guidelines, they did what they were supposed to do per our government, our shelter's policy. But that wasn't acceptable. This woman couldn't live like this. These cats shouldn't live like this. Something had to change. So at that point, I was able to talk to her, and she was willing to surrender these animals to our agency. But what the approach at that point was I needed to see the cats. I needed to get a little history on them, and I needed to work for a projected outcome. And that projected outcome was, what are we going to do? Take these 40 cats in and put them in our shelter? What comes to our shelter? Sick animals. We don't want to put cats if they're healthy, especially, or even if they're sick, because then that puts the whole population at risk. So as an agency, we worked together. We were able to get projected outcomes for these animals. And within a week's time, we had the animals all come in to our shelter. And I have to tell you, when she pulled up and I seen the cats in her truck, it was amazing. They were friendly, they were social, they were healthy. The truck was clean. She had litter boxes in the back area where they were just comfortable with it. And when we were impounding them, they were all handleable. They were healthy. There was one that was a senior cat, one out of them all. And when I tell you, they were these Seal Point and Himalayans and all variety of you would say a high desired breed. And at that point, we were able to get these animals into good homes and follow up with them. And what happened for me and this woman is we created a friendship. She needed to know what the outcome of these animals were. She needed to know for her healing process where they were going within reason, that they were, going to a home environment, that they weren't being euthanized, what the outcome of them were. And that made all of the difference. And that's coming up on 1 year that this case had taken place, and her and I still talk. I keep in touch with her. I follow up with her, she, me, we've become friends. But also when she's having a hard time or she feels like she needs to take on a little bit more, she'll call me and I get to explain, talk with her and say, okay, what can we do together so the burden doesn't fall on her? And then the next thing you know, she's back in the same situation. So that's really important for me, is to utilize all the resources we have within our county. As I mentioned earlier, when that first case, the woman went off, and I just assumed that the hospital or sheriff's office, somebody would follow up, and that is not the case. And what happened is I had to start reaching out and make my connections and relationships with human services, senior services, veteran services, community development. And I've had cases where those teams have come in and provided mental health, counseling. They've cleaned these homes. We've, spoken to the people, gotten the pet owner caretakers that are overwhelmed and got them to a reasonable number of animals. And then with the care of these other resources in our agency, we try to monitor. Does it always, is it 100% fail safe? Absolutely not. But I think it's creating a much bigger success rate than ever.
Stella, I just want to jump in really quick because I think it's important to, and how you and I are, we just start riffing and going off on tangents. But when I was approached by Stacy to talk about this topic for this conference, first of all, I love talking about hoarding. I'm fascinated by it. And the first person I thought, I was like, oh, wait, I have to have an animal control officer with me. And that person is going to be Stella, because I think Stella is a great example. And she even mentioned, like, when you were going through the proper channels, like this woman tried to do, she got turned away because black and white policy at the shelter is we don't take in owned pets. And so when somebody shows up with 40 of them in their truck, they're going to get turned down. And so I think that speaks to how important it is to kind of have a relationship with your local animal control officers, because there's always going to be somebody in the shelter system who has a passion for this and a passion for helping the people, and who has figured out, the grays, the shades of gray in there. They're not all about black and white. They will provide help. It's just going about it, maybe even through the back door, but knowing that there's somebody there who, like Stella, is going to help come hell or high water in that situation, even though it doesn't fall into kind of what the policies are in the shelter. And I think a lot of shelters are like that. And so she's been a great example of somebody who's able to do that, and then who has taken it the further step, I think, been building that relationship with the person, because somebody's going to have to do a little bit of that footwork in terms of, finding other resources if they're needed, like you said, with mental health or something. It may be you, or it may be somebody in the shelter system, or it may be somebody else in your rescue group. But that's the other thing. It's really like the power in numbers, is having a number of people who can help in this situation, because what is it? Many hands make light work. That it's important to kind of not get overwhelmed and be the one person who's helping in that case.
Well, as I say, I fully agree. And when it comes to building a relationship with your county shelter to find out what their policies are, what are they able to help with, and when you build that relationship, especially for, like I mentioned, with my rescue groups, it becomes an army, because, okay, maybe right now we're unable to help a certain case style, but as we get innovative or we see repeats of it and our rescue groups get behind us, or they know what our policies are, so okay, they know what we can and can't do, well, then we all figure out together what the needs of the community are and how we can start to change into what those needs, so we can supply something for those needs. I know for myself, I have rescue groups, my local groups, that when our agency is unable to help, because there's no gray area for certain things when it comes to my agency. I can't make it fit as much as I want to. Sometimes it just will not fit. And that's when I do reach out to my local rescue team and say, hey, this is what we've got going on. Can you help? And they're always willing to help, and vice versa. So creating that relationship with your resources from your county, your shelters, your senior services, and everything else is going to be so important for success.
So I just jumped to the next slide. I don't want us to get too past our time, because I know we have to give 15 minutes to questions. And I just was thinking too, like when I was putting this together with Stella, we thought about, do we do those steps? Like, what are the 1, 2, 3 steps you do when you have a hoarding situation? And we didn't include those. And I think that's because every situation is different. And so obviously triage, once you get your foot in the door, is going to be a very first step. So if there's critical animals that need help, those are the ones you can concentrate on initially. But it's so much more about building the relationships and then having the pool of resources that you can dip into. And then that's where we're at this slide here with a few things to keep in mind. Stella, if you want to jump back in here.
So when it comes to, and I love that you talked about on the bottom, being willing to try out options like barn cat placements. We have folks in our community that actually do that. They do the barn cat rescue and work with feral cats, or we have farmland that they maybe need some stray feral cats for. So we utilize that program as often as possible. We love that program. The important thing is, we want to be kind, like you're talking about on social media. If we start talking negatively about any of the cases we work, and this goes for rescue groups as much, then who's going to want to reach out to y'all? I know that if I see somebody writing something on a social media that's a negative about something they may have helped out with, I would be hesitant. So we want to make sure that we keep ourselves open and available for those in need, because then at that point, it's going to isolate people even more if they feel that they don't have somebody they can communicate with. And absolutely, animals can't help themselves. Animals aren't out there saving other animals. Animals aren't out there fundraising for other animals. It's people. So the people relationship and growing with your community. Yes, we love the animals. A lot of us are in this because we love the animal. Maybe people not so much, but we have to really start looking at that, because the people relationship is where it starts. Because who helps us save them? Who helps us raise money for them? Who goes out there and identifies these cases? It is the people component that is very important. We have to remember that.
And I think it's important to notice, or to note too, that people do respond. They want to help, especially when you can share a story here, but you have to just be careful about how you do that story. Like Stella was saying, you don't want to villainize the person and say, oh, this horrible person did these awful things. Look at how sick these cats are. Look at how awful this situation is, because you lose the relationship that you just spent all the time building. And it's not fair. It's probably not a true reflection of reality, even in the worst cases, in which there's a really good example here on the left. That is me. And I am feeding, yes, hundreds and hundreds of rabbits. And that was the Reno rabbit rescue that we did in 2008, I want to believe it was. And I don't know the final count. It's very hard to tell how many we dealt with over time because it was an extensive project. We had a lot of high mortality rate on these bunnies, but I believe it was 1,500 to 1,600 rabbits by the time we were all said and done. And the woman here was trying, but really didn't know what to do, didn't know who to trust. She had done some spay neuter with bunnies and lost them on the table, you know, with the vets. And so she didn't trust the vets. So then she stopped spaying and neutering. And so then it got crazy, but it didn't do us any good to kind of talk about how horrible she was. We just concentrate on the fact that there are rabbits that needed help. And when you reach out to the public, they do help. And I put something on Facebook yesterday about our presentation this morning, just if anybody had specific questions that I wanted to make sure that we touched on. And someone did mention, you know, working with other agencies, which is definitely something that is really necessary in these cases, but also sort of tips for placing these animals. And while I don't have that offhand right now in the short time frame that we had to do this presentation, there was a study that just came out that I literally heard the results about last night where, and I'll share this, I can share this someplace with you guys. Stacy can tell me where, maybe I can put it in the chat, but it showed that cats that are in these hoarding cases are just as adoptable as cats in other situations. The return rate was not crazy. It basically said, yes, these are highly adoptable cats. And I think for any of us who dealt with these cases and have walked in, we know that there are plenty of really nice animals in these situations. They just may need a little help overcoming their fear initially, or overcoming, you know, the medical stuff that they have going on. But you're not dealing with the whole, you know, 1,600 unadoptable rabbits. Like, many of those were very, very nice bunnies that, you know, could become pets. But you also have to be creative, like Stella was saying, with the barn cat situation, because these guys have lived in a certain type of scenario. You know, they may be far more comfortable putting some distance between themselves and people who want to touch them, you know, and they may be much better off in a group situation outside. Not this situation down on the right. That is the Nye County situation with the 700 plus cats that were out in the desert. And I know we touched on, I think Stella, you said it, there's 100% recidivism with hoarders, meaning 100% of the time they will go back to hoarding. That is certainly if they aren't interfered with, if they aren't given options, if they're left to kind of their own devices. Quite often it is even if you are helping. And so it is an ongoing thing. In the case of the Pahrump situation down there, Nye County, we pulled 150 something animals out of the founder's home, and she started collecting again within weeks. We hadn't even processed them all through the local animal control yet, and she was already filling her house up again. So even that, you are helping the animals that are in front of you, you're helping those cats, and you are making a big difference. And so it's knowing that, knowing what's going on, that I think can really help you when you walk in the door. So you're not caught off guard and surprised and really upset to find out that somebody is continuing to do that behavior. It's a very complex issue, hoarding, and we are the experts who can help with the animals. There's a whole lot of other stuff that other expertise is needed that isn't us. And so Stella, you have the last one here, and I do want to jump to some questions, but just reminding people kind of not to overwhelm themselves, I think, is a good thing.
When people, they see a need, they want to be that, you know, swoop in and the superhero, and I can take care of this. And then the next thing, by the time all that emotion settles and they're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, I bit off way more than I can chew. So it's more about being reasonable, working with, you know, other groups to find out what can we do here, triaging, finding out what the biggest need are, the medical necessities that have to be taken care of first, and then working out from there, you know, the sick and injured or the too young to take care of themselves, kind of, and then at that point doing you mentioned something earlier, Liz, about that lengthy case, and that's what I wanted to say too. This doesn't happen overnight. So if you do things in small doses and continue to build that trust, number one, it's easier on you, your agency, your rescue organization, and most of the times it's even easier on the caretaker pet owner that's, you know, the center of the case, because they start to feel a slow relief instead of it being that Band-Aid ripped off. The next thing, you're overwhelmed, they're overwhelmed, and what's the outcome for the animal? So that, I think, is important, is making sure you have an outcome for your animals, and it's what you can handle to start with, and then you grow from there.
There you are. Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Of course, I have like a whole page of questions. So hoarding is something I feel like we don't talk about a lot. So I'm really excited and thrilled about this presentation, because I think we need to not normalize it, but feel comfortable with it, a little bit more, and also see about how we can participate with the community in a way to prevent it from happening, acknowledging that, there are challenges and there are obstacles. It doesn't, a case doesn't happen overnight. A hoarding situation doesn't happen overnight. It festers, it grows, and it builds. And so how can we sort of triage or, intercede at an earlier part? So anyway, a couple little housekeeping questions that came about. One person wanted to know the source for the hoarding info from Tufts from 1999. So I don't know if we can just Google that, or Liz, if you have a link that you can put in the chat that we could share to Gary's research. But
I'll put together a couple links to the research. Sorry, I should have done a handout, but I will do that, and then I'll get that to you before the conference is over this weekend.
Super, or just throw it. You can also throw it in the Facebook group too, like as a comment to your thing.
Right, okay.
If you want to, you can always go there and do that. So that would be great. One thing you talked about was like, the numbers of cats in a space does not necessarily define a hoarding situation. It's more the quality of care for those cats, which I think is really an important issue. And there was one person that was asking about, what is an acceptable number of cats? Do you have a formula that you calculate to sort of define a hoarding situation? And I think that, well, I won't answer the question. You guys can take a stab at it, but I know you've touched upon this a bit in the presentation, but Stella, when you approach a potential situation, what's the mental checklist that goes through your head?
Well, first of all, there is our guideline, which there is a 9 domestic animal limit per household, but that's not necessarily the formula. What it becomes is, what is the environment? What are these animals thriving? What is the caretaker's ability to care for the animals, and how are they caring for the animals? One of the other big well, I don't want to say it's a problem, but one of the issues we run into here is, because there is no leash law for cats, we have the indoor-outdoor cat, or the just outdoor cats, where, as some of the photos that were shown, where there's however many cats, 30, 40 cats just on somebody's porch, is a reality. So when that caretaker says, well, they're outdoor cats, we kind of have no ordinance that's going to violate that. So then it comes down to, okay, well, do we have friendly ones? Can we get this to a healthy number? And people are usually super relieved when we offer the sterilization vaccination program, because then the neighbors aren't all upset because they're marking the territories around, but they're also getting sterilized, and we're reducing the number of the sickness, the dead kittens, everything that comes with that overpopulation from unsterilized and unvaccinated animals, the transformation of disease from cat to cat. So it's really identifying where these animals are thriving, what the caretaker's limits are at that point, and then we kind of take it from there. So it is a case-by-case basis. I think that helps. I hope that identifies the answer to the question.
Yep.
I feel like every time we ask the number question, like how many cats does it make to be a hoarder, we're really looking around the house saying, is it 9? I hope it's not 9. If it's 10, I'm good. If it's 9, I'm a hoarder. It's a personal.
Sometimes people, this is the thing, is sometimes people don't even know how many cats they have. So asking the number, sometimes it's like, I hear, you may see 20, but there's 40 or 60. So at that point, the numbers game is completely out the window.
So several questions are here about how to work with, you know, rescue hoarders or people who go to like Nextdoor or Craigslist. And so they're sort of inviting the community. I mean, there are some people who you get the reputation, everybody knows you're the person who'll help a cat. So your phone number, your cell phone number is everywhere. And that becomes a real challenge, right? Saying no in those situations. But then there are other situations where they will go to Nextdoor, they'll go out seeking cats to rescue. You know, how do you try and work with adjusting that behavior, and at what point do you think about trying to bring some mental health support or mental health you know, support for situations other than just the cat situation?
Liz, would you like to answer?
I don't know. What do you think, Stella? I'm not sure that that's different to me than any other kind of situation. When you bring mental health in, I think is when you have an opening, you know, when you can suggest, like, do you have enough trust in that person? Does that person trust you enough that you feel like you can say, listen, let me bring somebody to talk to us because I think what's going on, and maybe even framing it as us, you know, like, I think something's going on here with, you know, you're having an issue, letting go, and let's figure out what that is, because I don't think this is good for you or for the cats. And I know where you've been. I think for me, when I've worked on cases, small to large, it has been helpful for me to really kind of do that self-identification and even throw myself under the bus sometimes with individuals to sort of say, look, I've been where you are. I've been to that point where I'm like, oh, what's one more litter box? Let's just go ahead and put the litter box in the bathroom. You know, we'll step on litter and then we can take in 20 more cats. Like, to help people understand they're not the only ones who've made these types of choices, and maybe getting on an equal footing with them, they'll be a bit more open to having help, because I think in any of these cases, it's going to be helpful. I had a rescue partner who was not a hoarder at all, but fell into that situation where she ended up in a house with about 100 cats because she had sort of made a deal with the devil with this rescue group that she was with. And, you know, one day just looked around and she had all these cats, and she got to the point where she had to make the decision to downsize, and that meant euthanizing most of the cats in her house. And if that's not a heartbreak, I don't know what is. You know, I'm kind of never forgiven myself for moving away and leaving her to deal with the rescue situation on her own, even though I didn't make those choices. You know, being there for her, holding her hand and helping her make those choices would have been something that I wish I could have done. And so I think knowing that people are going to need assistance is really critical. But I don't know, that was kind of rambling. I don't know if I answered that question.
Well, Stella, so I mean, since you're a municipality, you probably have access to some resources for mental health support, some social service support. As a nonprofit individual rescue organization in Massachusetts, we very often, you know, animal control was aware of the situation, but they really weren't participating too much in the situation. So if you're if you're out in the rural world, there's not a lot of, you know, how do you find supportive resources?
Well, I think as far as community engagement from your municipal shelter locally is important. Building a relationship, telling them you need these services, and finding that connection with somebody there who will listen, because that's difficult. Because again, when it comes to the four corners of our contract and our ordinance kind of situation, thinking outside that box, well, gosh, that just creates more work. So they try to keep it on that beam, and it's finding that person that is willing to hear you, listen to you, and be available for you to put you in connection with those resources that are needed. So I think that's important.
I'm going to ask this question because I'm very much of a proactive person, not a reactive person. So would it be in our best interest to encourage our organizations to put together a resource sheet and maybe even meet and greet ourselves and say, hey, are you the right person that I should reach out if we have this situation? And so just to create that relationship ahead of time?
Absolutely. Finding out what how they would handle, what their policies and procedures are on maybe some of your past cases, and letting them know there's a need in the community. It's been identified. You all can do only so much. You would want to work as, it's that unity in the community kind of thing. So as far as, because you guys can help each other. You're not these, out on islands by yourself or siloed. So when you come together, the amazing work that you can do. So if you can connect with somebody there and being that voice saying, hey, let's open this door and let's explore, because there's a need, and the bigger the community gets, the bigger the need will be.
And one thing too, just I recall when Stella and I first started talking, and we had a conversation about the woman that she mentioned that she befriended. We really were talking about the fact that, Stella, I think this was your idea. Like we need almost a support group, almost like an AA type model, to support ourselves in this industry, because I think we all get overwhelmed, even if we don't drift into being in a hoarding type situation. But having that where we could talk to one another, because we are the experts on that as well. And so if anybody's interested in putting that together.
We at our shelter had created something along those lines, because we speak the same language. We go through the same, struggles. And when you talk to, I could talk to my boyfriend or my family about it. They don't understand it. They try to, God bless their hearts. But, there's a different level of a connection and a passion that us as the cat community or animal welfare community can relate to. So having a support group and your people to talk to, and whether it be a once a month thing, I think is extremely helpful, because we're all speaking the same language.
My one dream was always to identify near hoarders, not true, get them early. And that's actually was the founding for the community cat pyramid, because there are a couple of statements here in the questions box about groups that ran into situations with cats, 60, 70, 80 cats in the house. Person couldn't afford spay neuter for the first 6 cats, right? So we all know what happens. Then there's embarrassment. I dealt with a situation with over 80 cats, and the cats were being fed mac and cheese by the local food pantry, and the house was maybe 5 miles from our shelter, and you're like, what? How could this happen, right? Yeah, Stella, your eyes just came right out of the screen,
Yeah.
right out. We got a cat mobile sitting in front of the building. We offer free spay neuter, but this person got themselves into, he was, he just didn't know, he was like devastated, emotional. He just went internal. So how do we create the vacuum that comfortably gets us connected to those folks to get to them, to that first, the near hoarder situation at the 6 cats, to get them the spay neuter services that they need, which means a lot of integration, I think, with the other services and outreach and really aggressive availability of low cost spay neuter for owned cats. And I think that would make a huge difference in our hoarding situations, what we run into. And I think we've got a lot of animal welfare merging with food pantries, human food pantries, Meals on Wheels. There's a lot more community eyes connecting the human to the pets that maybe will help bring some of that supportive care that needs to happen. Wouldn't it be beautiful if someone with 6 cats got them all spayed and neutered, and we didn't have to take it down 3 to 5 years down the line and see what would end up there? Maybe they do collect shampoo bottles or something else, but I think that's part of the situation, is just trying to get some of these resources to the folks, and then the folks obviously to buy into the spay neuter too. But one person said that they got a grant for low cost spay neuter in the community to aggressively promote and advertise a low cost spay neuter program in their community to help make a difference. I don't know what your thoughts are about sort of how those two components sit hand in hand.
Well, for me, I know education. Go ahead, Liz. Go. No, go, Liz.
I was gonna say, just definitely within the industry, there's a trend more, and I think Stella is a great example She's not the old school ACO. ACOs are far more, they're evolving into the community officers, and that's kind of where a lot of the more progressive shelters are going, and progressive rescues too. They're all working together and trying to connect those dots so that, like you said, there is that information sheet. There is a place where to go to get those resources, because it's far more, things are being understood not as like a silo. Nothing is just about like, oh, there's this one cat and we need to help that cat. There's much more involved with that. And so there's resources that need to be tied in. And I think as we as an industry move more towards it being a community service based industry where there's connections between municipalities and these other resources, it'll be easier to kind of tie those things together. But the more, like you said, being proactive now and building those relationships and kind of putting the word out there, like, I mean, who wants to put the word out there like, hey, if you have somebody who needs help with a whole bunch of cats, let us know, because then you'll get that phone call and somebody will say, yeah, my aunt has 250 cats and she's dying. Nobody wants to take that. It's like, tag, you're it. No one wants that phone call. But putting yourself out there and being willing to kind of work through these cases, the only way to know how to work through these cases and have the next one be easier. So Stella, what were you gonna say?
Well, for me, what I recognize is just being available to the community. Education is key, but these folks don't even know we existed, let alone the resources that we were able to provide to them. And what I've seen throughout the years is it's like anything. If you go to a good restaurant or you go to a good car dealership, that word of mouth. My phone does not stop because of the trust that I built with the community. And a lot of the times they feel like I'm the only one who can solve their problem. And that's huge. It's it's an honor, but it's a big burden at times. But also, I don't want to dismiss when you get the folks who have the 500 cats, or you get the folks who have the 6 cats, they are just as equally important. So that's one of the things, we run on the emotion and being proactive. This lady has 65 cats. Well, we're going to run over to deal with that case. So what happens is the lady who had the 6 cats gets dropped to the bottom of the list. And then a year later, she's got 65 cats. So it's that preventative care, it's that education. And I have to tell you, with as much, we now are doing a once a month food bank. We gave out over 2,200 pounds of cat and dog food just in a week ago. It's the 3rd Thursday of every month. So, but that was priceless in itself. But the bigger part is we had our TNVR rescue groups that come that do the trapping and the spay and neutering and the returning. So that group was there. They're a non-for-profit, on top of the education to the community of low-cost spay and neuter, TNVR programs, the vaccination clinics, things of that. But the important thing is that the community trusts you. They've seen you work on cases. They've heard your name. I've been able to infiltrate an area that for 60 years, you couldn't even drive an animal control vehicle through that area without them throwing rocks at you, threatening you or whatever. Now my number gets passed around like nobody's business. And I'm grateful for that. But the reality too is it's gotten so big and busy, we can't handle it. So now we have to build outside resources to be able to maintain all of this. I'm grateful folks are coming to us, but now we've got to kind of catch up to the community that we built the relationships with.
Okay. And certainly, sorry, I just want to add into Stella, because you're like, people are calling you the innovative government person, innovative animal control. So, and not everybody has an innovative animal control officer. And what happens to Stella if Stella leaves her position and comes in? A lot of it is based on there's the structure that's created within the county, but then there's also Stella's way of doing things, right? And so if Stella left, would the position, that culture kind of potentially change, or does the innovative ACO position still stay and have a long-standing tradition, I guess?
Yeah, I think the field, right now it's incumbent upon shelters to, like I said, some are doing a better job at this than others, but shelters need to really get rid of the boogeyman, kind of relationship that they have to the public, because those people who have that many cats or dogs or bunnies, whatever, they're afraid. And the woman that we did the bunnies, she had, like I said, I think 1,200, 1,600 by the time we were done. 5 years before that, she had 500, and animal control came in and cleared them all out, killed them all. And so she would never trust animal control again. And so it is, if animal control is changing, they need to be aware and let the public know that they shouldn't be afraid. And we can help with that as independent animal welfare agencies. Rescues can help with that when we know we have a good organization, a good shelter, to break that down, to say it's not that old-fashioned dog catcher anymore. But there's a stigma that is sometimes well earned. So it's still a process.
Well, I'm going to just throw in there, so the thought process and how we support a hoarding situation over time is really thinking of it like a community cat colony. So because there's the vacuum effect, right? So, you trap and you remove and you euthanize everybody. And, in 2 years in Massachusetts, we had 35 cats back feeding out of the same dumpster, in 2 years' time. So you take and you remove everybody out of a hoarding situation, you should assume that there's a vacuum effect that's going to come into play. And I know the case was true in another hoarding situation that I dealt with, and they ended up like renovating the house and stuff. And we've done things like bring ServPro in and actually help with cleaning up the house and trying to restart their life a bit too. But in this situation, they were very distrustful of the shelter and that kind of thing. We were like, no, the cats that come in here, we want you to be a referral source to us. We want you to pass out our business cards to everybody who's coming to you for help. And then they became a really strong supporter of the organization for our fundraisers and that kind of thing too. Once they felt like they were part of our organization, and so we embraced them and brought them in as almost a volunteer. And we would drop food off with them and we would check in with them and that kind of thing, and just make sure that there was a two-way street from that situation. But there is this ongoing relationship. As Stella said, it doesn't end. It's not a one and done. It's a partnership. It's they're a volunteer with your organization in a way, and they're because they're part of your community. They're part of the animal welfare space in the community, for good, for bad, or ugly. They're part of that community. So, any last thoughts, Liz, before we close out?
I have a million last thoughts.
And I have a million more questions too.
I was going to say, like, and Stella and I am sure we'd love to see the rest of the questions, and we can go through and answer a bunch of that stuff on Facebook. I'm always happy to talk about, strategies that I've used in cases that have come up, so it's much more of a nuts and bolts kind of thing than we were able to kind of present in this space and time, because I know people are all thinking like, I have this case right now I'm trying to help with, what do I do first? So I'm always open to people reaching out, especially on Facebook. So that's kind of my last thoughts on it, Stella.
Okay.
No, same here. I would love to be able to, my thing is like an exchange program, an officer exchange program. How can I educate people that may be looking to get into something a little more innovative and proactive, but also what are they doing that I can learn from another agency? That's something I've been promoting for years and years, and we've tried to get involved with it, but then the next thing, staffing issue became a problem where we couldn't do so. But I think today's day with social media and things like that, like Liz said, reach out to me. I would love to talk to folks regarding this, any of these animal welfare issues, but from a government, a municipal shelter standpoint on how we are able to push that line a little bit, get more into the gray areas, not be so cookie cutter and black and white, because that's not solving anything. It's just a wash, rinse, repeat. So what can we do to be more proactive? But also it's all about the educating one another, educating our community, educating our rescue groups, and vice versa. So I think that's the key word, is education.